Okay, then, last week we talked about 3 areas that Satan influences that have a really dramatic impact on how we understand ourselves and God and the world around us. And one of these was fear, one of these was the church, and one of these was our ideas about relationship. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at these 3 ideas in a little bit more detail, talk about what kinds of mix-ups we can have about some of this stuff. What sorts of ideas do we have? What sorts of ideas can be developed? What sorts of ideas can be positive or negative about these different areas of our lives? Because these have a really big impact on how we live and what we do and how we work, right? So fear is huge. You know, the things that we're afraid of they're all over the place, all kinds of things, all kinds of fears. Of course, the way that we understand the church will determine how we relate to each other, how we relate to God, how we relate to the world around us, what kinds of work we end up trying to do for God, what kinds of interactions we end up having, and how we introduce other people to God. And relationship is connected to all this stuff. We'll mention relationship a couple of times. Relationship will be the last one we talk about, and we'll mention it a couple of times in the first 2. And that's just how we are connected to each other and to God and to other people and to the world around us. So it's another really big one. You know, how we relate to each other and our world has a tremendous impact not only on our witness, not only on our ability to understand God, not only on our ability to understand others, but on our ability to understand ourselves. So what we're going to start with is we're going to start with fear. Because fear is one of these things that generally everybody's experienced at some point pretty solidly. Everybody's afraid of something. We all have things that we're afraid of. And the question is going to be whether or not that fear is substantiated or unsubstantiated, at least for this class. We talked a little bit about godly and ungodly fear, and that's a whole different class. But what we want to talk about is substantiated and unsubstantiated fear. That is this fear something that is substantiated? It's a fear that is something that is reasonable, something that is justified, or is it unsubstantiated, which would be pretty much not reasonable or justified? And so what we want to do is we want to take a look at the characteristics of substantiated and unsubstantiated fear. What kinds of things lead to these things? What kinds of things develop substantiated and unsubstantiated fear? And that's really kind of what we're looking at here. So when we look at these, substantiated fear is an ABC fear. And the reason that we use ABC, you remember our breakdown that we had before. A is what? Analytical. And B is? Details. Mm-hmm. And C is? Emotion. Okay.
Feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Physical.
Yeah. So, when we talk about ABC, then A has the top priority. And so when we're talking about a substantiated fear, we're talking about something that comes out of our understanding, our analysis, our reason. It's something that we can explain. When we talk about unsubstantiated, we see we have BCA or CBA as more the focus. That is, our emotions or the particular circumstance we're in is what's dictating the fear. And as a result, this kind of fear, the unsubstantiated, is a reaction. All fear is a reaction. It's an emotion. But we react to our environment, and that's all that there is to this. It's a reaction to something. So what kinds of things are we afraid of? Examples. Let's get some examples out.
Sin.
Sin?
Unemployment.
What's that?
Unemployment.
Unemployment. Okay. All right. What else?
Cockroach. Dog.
Failure. Okay. Dogs.
Cockroach.
Cockroach. Flying cockroach.
What?
Cockroach.
Flying cockroach.
Oh, cockroaches. Flying cockroaches. Okay. All right. And so the thing is, we have these different fears, and these fears can be about all kinds of things. And this is one of the things that that it's important to be able to identify as what our fears are about. But the fears that we have are reactions to something, and the question is this something that we understand is dangerous to us, or something that we're just reacting to, that we're afraid of? We've gotten some kind of habit or response built up in us that we panic, or we get terrified when we run into something. So, and this can be different depending on what it is that we're working with. So let's say, for example, a fear of dogs. This is a good one because describe to me dogs.
Depends on the type of dog.
Okay, all right. So it depends on the type of dogs. So what type of dogs can we have? What different breeds?
Big dog.
Big dogs.
Big box.
Okay.
Bulldogs.
Bulldogs.
Maybe.
Now, is the bulldog a big dog or a little dog?
Big dog.
The bulldog's a big dog.
Bulldog is a big.
Bulldog nga.
Bulldog. Is it good dogs or bad dogs?
I can have a bulldog, but a big one. But a bulldog also the small one.
Yeah, they have big bulldogs and small bulldogs. Okay.
Fury.
What's that?
Fury. Fury.
Oh, so yeah, they're furry.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, and some are furrier than others. I had, there was one gal I met, she had a Irish wolfhound. I don't know, are any of you familiar with the Irish wolfhounds?
I know what they look like.
The Irish wolfhounds look like what?
They've got long fur and they're tall, skinny.
Yeah, they're tall, skinny shag rugs, basically, is what they look like. They look like somebody took a rug, a big, you know, furry, fuzzy rug, and they just draped it over a tall, skinny dog. And that's what these dogs look like. They're about this big. And they're just fur with a head and nose and ears. And, I mean, they're big dogs. I mean, they're, you know, roughly ish high. And she had 3 of them. And she lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. But the thing with Irish wolfhounds is, Irish wolfhounds are very low energy dogs, so they're actually really good apartment dogs, despite the fact that they're huge dogs. Now, I had another friend of mine who had a miniature toy poodle. Now, they have poodles. See, have you seen the poodles? The dogs, they'll have the really tight, curly fur, and they'll cut it so that they have the fur around the head and the fur around the bottoms of the feet. And, you know, they have the poodle cut they talk about.
How much is that dog?
Yeah, poodle. And a poodle is about that big. You know, but they have miniature poodles, and then they have toy poodles, and then they have miniature toy poodles. And I had this friend of mine who had a miniature toy poodle, and her brother had a rat, and we used to joke that the rat was bigger than the miniature toy poodle. The rat was bigger than the dog. But here's the thing. When we're talking about being afraid of dogs, now I've got this, and the type of fear that we're talking about can be substantiated or unsubstantiated fear. So we've got these dogs. Now, why would we be afraid of dogs?
They bite.
They bite, okay?
They're unpredictable.
They're unpredictable, okay? All right, anybody else?
There are from time to time evidences that dogs even kill, bite their owners
Mhm.
and then to death.
Mhm.
I mean, it happens.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
happens everywhere.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. So dogs are certainly potentially dangerous. They do have a capacity for biting and causing damage that ranges from not necessarily a lot to incredible amounts of damage. We've got 2 Borbals in Mozambique, and the Borbal breed of dog ranges from about 120 pounds to almost 200 pounds. And they tend to be, well, there's one Borbal that I saw that was these are about yay big. They can get about this big. And they're basically built like a brick wall. And the bite strength of the Borbals is strong enough that there was one guy that Al met when he was down there, and he had a Borbal, and if the Borbal decided it didn't like you, what it would do is it would go over to your car and bite the steel-belted radial tires of the car and puncture the tires and blow them out. Just go over, chomp, and there, your tire's gone now. That's the kind of bite strength these animals have. It's tremendous. Bulldogs are very similar, really, really strong bite strength. All dogs have a pretty decent bite strength.
So knowing their capability, knowing their potential, without actually having experienced that yourself,
Mhm.
that would still cause a certain amount of fear, right?
It can, yes. But the question is, why do I have the fear of dogs? Because growing up, I had a Cocker Spaniel. And this Cocker Spaniel was an idiot. I used to call it the smartest, stupid dog I had ever met. Because it was smart enough to figure out all kinds of ways to get out. We had it in a fence in the backyard. And it figured out every way imaginable to get out of this fence. It would tunnel under it, it would find a way to climb over it. It picked the lock on the fence. Now granted, it was a sliding lock, it wasn't an actual lock that you would really pick. But it figured out how to open up the gate and get out. We thought you needed opposable thumbs to open up the gate and get out. We were wrong. So very clever dog, but very unwise dog. But the dog was a very friendly dog. It was a very nice dog. The dog never showed any aggression toward a human being. The dog really never showed any aggression toward anything except cars, which dogs tend to just apparently find to be the most evil things on the face of the planet. At least when I was growing up, that was their greatest enemy, was cars. Of course, I lived out in the country and they didn't see very many of these loud, noisy things that would run right along the edge of their territory, which I think was half the problem. But our dog, Prince, this little Cocker Spaniel, pretty much, as far as any animal goes, this dog was not an aggressive, dangerous dog. We had him his entire life, not an aggressive, dangerous dog. The only reason that you would be afraid of this dog is if you were afraid that perhaps he was going to shed on your pants. That was pretty much it. Otherwise, no, not a threat. So this dog, and I met people who were afraid of the dog. Now the question is, did they have a reason to be afraid of that dog? Well, yes, dogs bite. But is that a reason to be terrified of this dog to the point that you can't get anywhere near this animal? What do you think?
Well, there'd be no intimidation there, wouldn't it?
Well, the dog, like I said, no aggression toward humans.
No reason to.
No real aggression. I mean, it was a Cocker Spaniel. It's supposed to have aggression toward something, and really the only thing that it ever went after was cars. And trust me, the cars were not going to be hurt by the Cocker Spaniel.
But if people see that the dog can do that to the car, so he will do that to me too.
The dog can't do anything to a car. Cocker Spaniel's that big. I mean, he's about this big. All he can do is bark at it and chase it.
So I said because in general people have this picture of dogs already and they're afraid of dogs and so they think this dog is maybe that type of dog as well.
Well, yeah. They basically, we can talk about things like projection. You know, I've run into this kind of dog or I've heard about this kind of dog, and so I'm assuming that this sort of dog is that. But I don't have a reason to think that this dog is something to be afraid of. I
So it's
just...
just one concept that dogs are dangerous and perhaps this dog is one of those. Or...
That could be. There could be that concept. But a lot of people I've run into don't even really have that concept. They're just afraid of the dog.
It's a dog. So
It's a dog, so I'm afraid of it.
Yeah.
Now, if it's just a dog and I'm afraid of it, and I'm not thinking about reasons for being afraid of this thing, now my fear is unsubstantiated. Now, if I run into, say, one of the dogs that we've got in Mozambique, these Borbals, they're guard dogs. They are very territorial, very protective, and have only killed several other dogs in the last year. They are very, very, very aggressive toward dogs. Now, if they know you, that is, if you come up to the house and one of us or one of the other people that it knows lets somebody in, then the dog's fine. You're fine. The people said you could come in. It's okay. No problem. They like people. They'll come up. Oh, look, you're a person. This is neat. I got down there, and here are these two Borbal dogs, and I get out of the car, and the dogs are like, look, it's a different kind of person. That's fascinating. And, then they were just, and they wanted to play and all this kind of stuff. So, however, if you are not invited in, and you try to get in, and you are not one of the approved people, you may not make it out of the yard. And I'm not joking. You may not make it back out of the yard. Those dogs will take down anything that comes into that yard that they think isn't supposed to be there. And they are big enough that they can take down anything in that yard. Now, here's the thing. If I am around those dogs, then those dogs are definitely much more dangerous than my Cocker Spaniel. They're bigger, they're stronger, they're much more aggressive when their aggression is triggered. But the question is, do I have a reason to be afraid of these dogs? And the key word there is afraid of the dogs, not cautious around the dogs, not careful around the dogs, but afraid of the dog, I can't deal with the dog is terrifying me, now I need to go hide in the car. Well, if you're invited in, do you have a reason to be afraid of the dogs? What do you think? No. Because the dogs are trained and they're bred to be guard dogs. But they're also handled in such a way that if a person is okay, then the person is okay. Now, if you're sneaking in over the wall, now you have a reason to be afraid of the dog. And so we have a difference between an unsubstantiated fear, where I'm afraid of these dogs just because they're big dogs and they're potentially dangerous, and a very substantiated fear because I know that these are guard dogs and they are programmed, both by breeding and by training, to attack anything that comes into that yard without approval. Now I have a substantiated reason to be afraid of those dogs. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And this is what we're talking about, the difference between me being afraid of something, and there may be reasons generally to be cautious around different things. I mean, cars, for example, are large, heavy objects that travel at high speeds all the time. Generally, large, heavy objects traveling at high speeds have a great deal of potential to do a lot of damage. We see that every time there's an accident, right? But if we spend our entire, if we spend all of our lives in Hong Kong being afraid of cars, how far would you get out your door? I mean, think about it. Would you be able to do anything in this city if you were afraid of cars? Cars, buses, trucks? No. Because while it is good to understand that there are dangers associated with this thing, there's no reason for a fear of these things because we understand how they work and why they work and what's going on with them. Now, I certainly want to be cautious. You know, if I'm driving a car, I don't want to just go tearing down the road as fast as I can possibly go and not look at anything that's going on around me and just, you know, drive like I'm on an open road in the middle of nowhere. As a matter of fact, I can tell you from experience, even when you're on an open road in the middle of nowhere, you don't want to drive like you're on a deserted road in the middle of nowhere. Because there's always something. You can get an animal into the road. You can get all kinds of stuff into the road. You never know. So you always want to be cautious. There's always a reason to be careful. But there's a difference between that and fear, where I am afraid of the thing. I can't deal with this thing. I want to get away from this thing. Does that make sense? So on one hand, we talk about our reasoning behind our fear, and the reasoning that we want to have is this reasoning. When we talk about the reasoning behind an unsubstantiated fear, we've talked about this, right? So there are reasons that we would be afraid of dogs. Because they're big, because they can bite, because they're potentially dangerous. But our reasoning here, in this case, our reasoning is part of the source of the fear. There's a fire in the building. I am afraid. I have every reason to be afraid. Over here, I am afraid of dogs. I am afraid of dogs because dogs are dangerous. The difference here is that even though a dog is dangerous, I don't necessarily need to be afraid of the dog. And so my reasons, in a lot of cases for unsubstantiated fear, aren't the reason for the fear. They're a justification for the fear. The reason we give because we're afraid, not we're afraid because we have a good reason. Does that make sense? Yeah, so we give a reason for our fear because we're already afraid of the thing, as opposed to having a reason to be afraid of the thing, so now we're afraid. We have the fear, again, first, instead of the reason first. And the same thing is true of a lot of these. We talk about truth. Now, if I am afraid of something, it is just flat out true that I am afraid of something. I can't deny that. You know, if I have a fear of, say, flying cockroaches, I am afraid of flying cockroaches, period. I mean, that's just true. But there's a difference between whether or not it's true that I am afraid of flying cockroaches and whether or not I should be afraid of flying cockroaches, or if flying cockroaches are something to fear. So are flying cockroaches something to fear?
Unfortunately, no.
No, they're not. They're not. So we understand when we talk about truth here...
Unless you're riding your bike with your mouth open.
Sometimes we talk about, Al talks about true truth. The technical English term for it is objective truth. That is the truth about the way the world really is. Flying cockroaches aren't something to be afraid of. That doesn't mean they aren't something to smash. They're just something, they're not something to be afraid of. There may be all kinds of reasons why I don't want cockroaches around. They carry disease, they get into and eat my food, all kinds of things that I don't want them for. but those aren't reasons to be afraid of them. On the other hand, the truth of the unsubstantiated fear isn't objective. All we have there is what we call the subjective, and you don't really need to remember these terms. But this is, I add them just for because I tend to like to be complete about this stuff. But basically the difference between the truth here and the truth here, both of these things are true that I am afraid. But only one of these things is it true that I need to be afraid of.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Which goes back to, is it,
Oh, basically any fear, it is true that I am afraid. But substantiated fears are the ones that it is true that these things are something to be afraid of. So these are things to fear,
That you should feel.
that you should
Yeah,
fear.
because you have reason.
How about the subjective?
The subjective, both of these are subjective in that if we're afraid, if we are afraid of something, we're afraid of it. It's true that we're afraid of it. That's just a fact. My fear is real. My fear is always real. It's an emotion, and as soon as I feel it, it's real. Whether or not it is something that I should be afraid of is different. So when I talk about the truth of a substantiated fear, I'm talking about the fact that it's something I should be afraid of. I should be afraid of a raging fire inside of my house. I have good reason to be afraid of that. I should not, on the other hand, be afraid of the pilot light in my oven.
So the truth in the unsubstantiated side just means it's true that I don't have a good reason to be. It's true
Well,
that I shouldn't be afraid.
Well, it's true that I am afraid, but that's all it means.
That's it.
It's just true that I'm afraid. On the substantiated side, there's more truth to it. There's the truth that I'm afraid, but there's also the truth that this is something to be afraid of. This is something to fear. Substantiated fear can be
Yes.
tangible or intangible. So we talked about having fear of dogs. Dogs are tangible, very tangible. We also talked about being afraid of sin. Can anyone describe sin? Not a sin. Sin.
Have you done something wrong?
Can you show me sin? Not a sin, not a particular sin, but sin. No. No, because sin is an idea. It's a concept. It's intangible. So I can be afraid. I can have a substantiated fear, a reasonable fear of tangible or intangible things. But unsubstantiated, you notice all we have down here is intangible. Why? Why do you think?
Sorry, about
Yeah.
sin. Sometimes a kind of sin, you haven't, maybe it's in your mind, you haven't done something wrong, but already in your mind you thought of some evil idea. But then some sin is like adultery. Really, some people done something wrong. That is tangible.
Yeah, and so we can talk about tangible or intangible examples of sin. But sin itself, just sin, is an idea that we have about these things that we do. So this thing is a sin. It applies to this action. This thing is a sin. It applies. The idea applies to this action. This thing is not a sin. This idea doesn't apply to this action. So sin is an idea. But the actions can be sinful actions or not. Whether it's an intangible thought or a tangible action. This down here, though, is intangible. Unsubstantiated fear is always intangible. Why?
because you have actually no objective truth or reason about it.
There's no objective truth. There's nothing actually there that's reasonably making me afraid. There's the fear, which is an intangible thing, which I then apply to whatever it is that I'm afraid of. The Fear is the thing that is real, not a reason to be afraid. So here we have reasons to be afraid, and they can be tangible and they can be intangible. But here our reason to be afraid is just the fear. And that's intangible. So if I have a fear of dogs where I see a miniature toy poodle and I go running for the next room, or like one person that we know who's afraid of frogs, she runs across a frog, and I think she set a high jump record. She probably could qualify in the Olympics as long as you had a frog at her feet for high jump.
She come in second. I was first. That's
Yeah, but you were jumping at the screen.
yeah, I was jumping.
Yes. There is nothing about a frog that justifies that level of reaction. The fear is what she has. And the fear then applies to the frog. So she sees the frog, it triggers the fear, but the fear doesn't have a justification or a reason. It isn't substantiated. It's just a reaction. So not a reason, a reaction. Now, both substantiated and unsubstantiated fears are grounded in relationships. So we talk about reasons for being afraid. That's part of our relationship to that thing that we're afraid of. I'm afraid of this thing because this and this and this. I'm afraid of a raging fire inside of my house because it's out of control. I can't control it, and it will kill me if I get in the middle of it. And that is my relationship with that fire. It's my relationship with that fear. But in unsubstantiated fear, the relationships are tangled. So if I have a crippling fear of frogs, why might I have a crippling fear of frogs?
An experience
Yeah, an
in
experience.
the past
Mhm.
with frogs.
Yeah, an experience in the past with frogs, most likely.
Someone was teasing you with a frog when you were a little kid or something.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe when you were a little kid, someone took a pail of frogs and dumped it over your head, or who knows. But I mean something, and that's all it takes sometimes. Something suitably traumatic, suitably shocking that you associate with this thing. And then when you encounter the thing, you react with that same shock. And these things become associated with that. They're related to it, but there's no reason for the fear. The fear is just now connected to this thing, but there's no reason for it to be. It just got, it's a mental habit or a pattern that you got locked into. And now you've got this pattern that you're locked into. I have mild claustrophobia. You put me in a tight space, and I start getting really nervous. I can tell you exactly when I acquired that fear. Exactly when I acquired it. I'm not going to tell you, because it's terribly embarrassing. And there are cameras rolling. But I can tell you exactly when I acquired that fear, because I know what caused it. I know what triggered it, where it came from in the first place. And the problem with a fear like claustrophobia is that being trapped or being in a tight space is a reasonable thing to be afraid of. But if you are so afraid that you can't think, there's nothing you can do. You're not only are you now trapped outside here, you're trapped here. And that's the problem with a fear like claustrophobia. It's not that I don't have good reason not to want to be trapped somewhere. It's that I get trapped up here, and now my chances of getting out are even lower than they used to be. So the relationship with substantiated fear, the fear is related to the object of the fear in a way that's based on our understanding of that object. And unsubstantiated fear is related to the object based on something completely different. It just got associated with it somehow. It got hooked in there, and there's not a reason to be afraid of it, at least not to the degree maybe. Like with being trapped inside something, not to the degree to which we have it, or being in a tight space. And fears are weird things, right? So I get into a tight space. Let's say I'm in a room the size of the kitchen there with 6 other people. I'm not having a good day. I'm very nervous, very irritated. On the other hand, you take me and you put me in an airplane that's roughly the size of this table, these 2 tables put together, and almost as high. So the seats are about this big and the top of the plane's right about here. And you put me inside one of these things and fly me somewhere for 3 hours, it doesn't bother me. That's not a problem. I've been in submarines. Tight, close. Not a real big problem. Unless there's a big tour group going through the submarine, then I get kind of twitchy. But that's my fear of people, which is a different fear. That's putting 2 and 2 together and coming up with 300. Because fears don't do math right either.
I think I encounter people that they have some kind of unsubstantiated fear.
Mhm.
I mean, substantiated fear could be 2 times, 3 times, 100 times bigger and threatening than the substantiated fear.
Yeah, yeah. Because the unsubstantiated fear doesn't require an understanding. The reasoning skills behind it aren't there. It's something that I've learned, and there's no justification for it. There's no reality behind it. It's just fear. And so it can be as out of control as it can get. Because there's nothing that it's grounded in. There's nothing it's connected to that tells me how afraid do I need to be. So if I have a fire in the kitchen, then there's a certain degree of fear. But that degree of fear is not the same as if there's a fire in the entire front room here and I'm sitting on the stairs. Those are 2 different degrees of fear for 2 different circumstances. But if somebody turns on the burner in the kitchen and I have the same reaction as if I was on the top floor of a 60-story building and the bottom 59 floors are on fire, now I have a problem. Because I have a really good reason to be afraid in a situation where I'm on the top floor of a building and the rest of it's on fire. That's bad. But if I have that same reaction to the burner being on in the kitchen, that's completely unsubstantiated. I don't have any reason for that kind of reaction. My relationship is somewhere messed up because I am reacting in a way that's completely out of proportion to what I'm working with or what I'm encountering. Does that make sense?
Sense.
And so when we're talking about dealing with fear, because this is what Satan does. Satan builds this as much as possible. Anything to disrupt our thinking. Anything to throw us off. Anything to kick us out of sort, out of action, out of our ability to think through our situation. And so Satan wants these things to occur. This is the kind of fear that he works on building. And so to combat this, how do we combat this kind of fear? How do we combat this?
With truth.
With truth, but I can know that I don't need to be afraid of the poodle and still be afraid of the poodle. So there's something else that has to go on.
Some kind of comprehension or reasoning.
That's part of it. But I still have that. Remember, in both of these cases, the fear is real. It's actually there.
You have to face your fears. Maybe.
In some way.
Go into a room of 100 poodles and sit there for half an hour.
That could be one way. That could be one way. It could make it worse, but it could also deal with the fear. But the thing is, remember, the fear is a broken or mismatched relationship. And figuring out this is what's going to allow us to deal with it. Not just where did it come from, because I know why I have my claustrophobia. I know exactly where it comes from. The thing that I don't necessarily know is how to repair this mismatched relationship so that it is this relationship. So what I want is I want a relationship that generates a substantiated fear or none, instead of a relationship that generates unsubstantiated fear. So whatever that thing is that I'm afraid of, my relationship with that thing can either be this type or this type. And what I want to do is figure out how to move this from here to here. And because everybody is different, the way that you do it is different for everybody. And this is the thing. I can't give you a set answer. Because there isn't one. You're going to deal with your fears different than I'll deal with mine. Because you're you, and I'm me. And Linda will deal with her fears different than I will deal with mine. So will Scott, and so will, everybody. Everybody will deal with fears differently. And sometimes we'll be able to deal with the fears on our own. So I realize that I'm uncomfortable in tight places, and maybe I go and I spend time in tight places so that I get used to it. I have, in fact, done that. It's worked a little. It's worked a bit. I certainly am no longer as uncomfortable in, say, the train system here than I would have been before I went to Los Angeles, Chicago, and, other big cities. I spent several years in those cities. And during that time, I got used to having a bigger crowd and a tighter place that I'm working with. So now I come out here, yeah, I can deal with it. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me. And it would have, say, 10 years ago. So I've dealt with it to some degree, but I'm still working on that relationship. But it may work different with different people. And sometimes you may need help. So I might be able to work with it on my own, but I might need somebody's help to help me work with it. So we can overcome our fears, but we need to be able to understand what our relationship with our fear is. What kind of relationship is it? Is it substantiated? Is it unsubstantiated? Because really, this is just the type of relationship that we have with the object of the fear. Is our fear of this thing substantiated? Is it justified? Is there a reason for it? That's one relationship. Is our relationship unsubstantiated, unjustified? There's no reason for it. And if it's the other one, well then what about that relationship can I change to make it this one? Does that make sense? Okay. Anybody have any questions? Thoughts, comments?
No, I don't have a question, but yeah, talking about what?
Unsubstantiated.
Sorry.
You can also call it unreasonable.
Unreasonable,
Yeah,
okay.
there you go.
Yeah, I know some people when getting to this type of fear, right, and it gets really, really serious. That's the reason why many times people kill themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they cannot get rid of that fear, and so the only way out is by.
Well, the only one that they can identify anyway, and that's again, this is part of the deception, that I can't do anything about this.
Yeah.
All I can do is try to escape it,
Yeah.
run from it. And like Scott said, the solution is actually to confront it, to face down the trouble with the relationship, figure out what it is, and start addressing it. Now, do we have to do this with every single fear that we have? Well, it'd be good to. Is it necessary to do it with every single fear that we have? Honestly, we probably have other things we need to address first. In some cases. In other cases, no. I mean, if you have somebody who has a crippling fear of, say, people, that's going to cause massive damage to them over the course of time, because we are supposed to be social. And if we're afraid of people, that causes a lot of trouble. On the other hand, if I'm afraid of flying cockroaches, I can probably get by with that until I fix some of the other bigger issues that I've got to worry about. Unless they send me screaming into the street, in which case I might want to deal with it sooner rather than later.
I mentioned that there are people groups out there that live in unsubstantiated fear and have no concept of the other whatsoever.
Yeah, there's nothing out here. This is the only kind of fear that they know.
But in serious cases, people will get sick,
Oh yeah,
and really sick, and that's the most terrible
oh yeah,
thing.
yeah. We can talk about anxiety. We can talk about sometimes anxiety is really fun because that can actually be a fear of nothing. I don't even have something the fear is attached to. It's just there. I'm afraid. I don't even know why I'm afraid. I'm just afraid. And that'll drive people, that will literally drive people insane. Because that just destroys every other relationship they've got.
I am thinking of some way out about avoiding the unsubstantiated fear. It's because the contrast of fear is peace.
Mm-hmm.
And then just like what you pitched this morning, we need to transform ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Then we can avoid those fear.
Mm-hmm.
And then fear is from Satan.
Mm-hmm.
God will not give you fear.
Mhm.
God give you trust, peace.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus has the uncomparable peace
Mm-hmm.
that the whole world cannot give.
Mm-hmm.
And that will comfort us.
Mhm.
And that will strengthen us.
Mhm.
And that will move us on
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
to continue to transform ourselves to get out of
Mm-hmm.
that unreasonable fear.
Good, which actually leads us to our next section. Our next section is going to be the church, which is the body of Christ and part of our relationship with Christ, and to our third section, which is relationship just generally. See, you're helping us out here. You're moving us along.
Time, some break.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take about a 5-minute break. I need to change the board here, and then we'll start talking about the church. This time, we're talking about the church and our ideas about the church. Because how we understand the church will have a dramatic impact on how we relate to other people, how we work with God, how we work with each other. And what I want to talk about is two broad concepts. It's actually a collection of ideas, characteristics about the church. Collection of ideas about the church, but two broad categories of things, ways of understanding the church. And we didn't have a really good term to use for each of these categories, so we borrowed two, because these relate to a lot of these concepts that we talk about here. So we'll talk about the spiritual church and the fleshly church, or the church that is developed through the Spirit, or the church that is developed through the flesh. And what we mean by this is a church that is developed through Christ or a church that is developed through man. Does that make sense? Because there's and this is the thing that's tricky about being a Christian anyway, right? We're all people. We're all human. So everything that we do is human. We can't do not human things because we're human. So whatever we do is going to be human developed. The question is going to be, whose principles are we using? Whose ideas? What foundation? Is it Christ's or is it just ours? Because this again, we have the A, the understanding that's driving it, or our particular practices and emotions that are driving it, our habits or our traditions that are driving it. And what we want to do is we want to have an understanding. And this, we talked about a bit actually in the sermon today, the idea that we're moving from intangible ideas to tangible actions. So our ideas drive what we do. What we understand about Christ, what we understand about God, drives how we act. And so if I understand something about Christ or God or what God wants or what Christ wants, this is what will drive my action. So our actions, the tangible things about the church, are determined by the intangible things that we understand about Christ. Does that make sense? By contrast, the church that we develop works from tangible to intangible. So we see, what do I have? And then I try to create a philosophy or a theology based on what I'm doing, my practices. This is what I am doing. This is how I justify what I am doing.
Can you have an example? Any examples?
Oh, let's see. So you've got a church that, say, there's almost no example, first of all, that I can give that's not going to offend somebody somewhere, because doggone it, everybody does stuff like this. So what I'm going to use is I'm going to use a church that doesn't use instruments. Now, there's a number of reasons why you wouldn't use instruments, and I'm not going to make any claims about a church that doesn't use instruments. What I am going to say is that if you are developing theology to justify this, you really want to think carefully about what you're doing, because we don't have instruments in our church. Well, why don't we have instruments in our church? Well, it may actually be that no one remembers why we don't have them. It may just be a tradition in the church that we didn't have instruments. But now, somebody asks or somebody challenges it, and we're perfectly comfortable not having instruments. And so we're trying to justify why we don't have instruments. And so we go to the Bible, and we try to find something in the Bible that says something about instruments. And we take that thing and we apply it to what we're doing, whether it fits with what we're doing or not. Even if the idea, the concept doesn't fit, we fit that idea to our situation. And now I have a theology, and I can go to the Bible and show you where the Bible says that you shouldn't have instruments in church. But the reason that theology exists is not because it was an idea of Christ or an idea of God's. It was a practice we had that we wanted to justify. And this happens a lot in the church. In addition, we can have situations where maybe I preach a sermon based on a particular situation in the church that I want to influence. So I develop this sermon to deal with this particular thing that I want to influence. And so I preach that as theology. Now, I may be right, I may be wrong, but the place for the disagreement is sitting down and having the discussion, not getting up in the pulpit and making this a statement of God's or a teaching about God. It's about us sitting down and talking about it, the disagreement. So what I've done is I've taken something that's going on and I've developed a theology based on that. So what happens then is that in the Christ developed, because we're working with Christ's ideas and we are allowing those to shape what we do, it's going to be covenant driven. That is, the new covenant, this new relationship with Christ, is going to be what drives the church. Because that's what these ideas are coming out of. That's what these ideas are tied into, is this new covenant. By contrast, if we're developing it ourselves, it's going to be program driven.
Yeah.
This is what we do, and this is why we do it, and it's going to be based on tolerance. So we're going to do our thing, and as long as you're doing our thing, it doesn't matter what else you do. You're doing the thing, so that's all that's needed. I'm going to upset people again one of these days. The Catholic Church has a doctrine that I have some disagreement with, and I would want to sit down with the Catholics and discuss this with them, because I may have an incomplete understanding. But from what I understand, one of the doctrines is of the works worked. And it's a doctrine related to salvation. And what it says is, as long as you do the things you're supposed to do, you're saved. As long as you perform the action. And that is exactly what this is. It's program driven and it's tolerance. As long as you do what you do, it doesn't matter what else you do. That's all that you need to do. And so it's program driven and it's tolerance. So I'm not building a relationship with you. So we're not building a relationship with each other, we're just doing the things we do together. And after we do those things, it doesn't matter what we do. Now, because it's covenant-driven, because it's a relationship, this Spirit-filled church, this Christ-developed church, is based on grace and forgiveness. Because that's what this covenant is based on, grace and forgiveness. The new covenant is a covenant of forgiveness. The church is a church of forgiveness. However, here, because it's man-developed, you have a program-driven church based on tolerance, and so you have legalism. That is, as long as you you have to follow the program. As long as you follow the program, it doesn't matter what else you do. But here, you have to follow the program. Or you are a horrible, horrible, wretched human being who is clearly going to hell. All the time. If you don't do exactly what we say, then you're a horrible person. Now, of course, there's a problem with this. How many people can ever do exactly everything they're supposed to do? Raise your hand if you always do exactly what you're supposed to do. Yeah, that's what I thought. Quiet, you. Yeah, people raising their hand. But no, and when we know, we don't get everything right. It doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter if it's our job, our families, our church. We always mess up something. We're human. We make mistakes. That's what happens. But in this situation, as soon as you make a mistake, you're condemned. You're a bad person. You're horrible. You're evil. You're wicked. You're whatever it is. Where here we understand, yeah, you make mistakes. But hey, look, the goal is the relationship. This is what we want to develop. We want to understand these ideas to change our actions so that we develop a covenant relationship with Christ. So yeah, you make mistakes, but this is what we're focused on. But here, since this is what we're focused on, every mistake you make is a horrible action. Because that's all we have, is our program. And as soon as you break the program, there's nothing left. So I go and I do something wrong, and now I'm a horrible person.
That sounds like tolerance.
But this?
Yeah.
No, why is it tolerance?
Isn't tolerance the opposite of legalism? Maybe we need to define tolerance a little bit more for us.
Well,
because to me, tolerance is the opposite of legalism.
Well, tolerance is my ability to basically tolerate something.
So there's no toleration of anyone who doesn't follow the rules in legalism.
Right. Right, that's it. There's no toleration of anyone who doesn't follow the rules in legalism. And that is a tolerance-based output, though, because here's the thing. I tolerate everything else. Everything that isn't associated with this, I just tolerate. It doesn't matter what it is. But if I've got a relationship going here, now I'm interested, I'm involved, I'm connected to everything that you do. Everything you do, I am related to. I am connected to. Because what happens to you affects me. You know, so I say that I have a relationship with my family. If something happens to one of my family members, that affects me. That has an impact on me. My family member gets hurt, I get hurt. Not the same way, but I still get hurt. If my family member is in trouble, I have a reaction to that. I am involved in that. But here, as long as you're following the rules, it doesn't matter what else goes on. It doesn't matter if you're in trouble. It doesn't matter if you're falling apart. It doesn't matter if you're blowing up inside. As long as you follow the rules, that's all we do.
But we will not tolerate you not following the rules.
But legalism says we're not going to tolerate you not following the rules. Everything else, though, and again, see how it's revolving around tolerance. We tolerate anyone who follows the rules. We don't tolerate anyone who doesn't. Over here, we're forgiving everybody. The goal is to develop the relationship. So the same way that, you know, you've got a kid, the kid does something wrong, then yeah, you're upset with the kid, you tell them that they're wrong, you explain to them why they're wrong so that they understand what's going on, but you don't disown them. Because you have a relationship. And whatever that thing is, you can deal with that as long as you've still got the relationship. We can work through whatever this thing is if we have a relationship that is developed. Yeah.
I don't know if you mind if I put it this way.
Mhm.
To me, we don't, not because of we want to build relationship, and we build relationship. Actually, covenant is relationship, grace is relationship, forgiveness is relationship.
Yeah.
They're all two ways.
Yeah.
Because of covenant, because of grace, because of forgiveness, automatically
Yeah.
we build relationship.
Yeah. This is all everything in here is
So I think
self-reinforcing.
that will be, priority. Not because of relationship that we build relationship. Because we have covenant, we keep the covenant.
Yeah.
Because of grace, we keep the grace.
Mhm.
Forgiveness,
Mhm.
they're both ways. Then we will develop relationship.
Yeah.
That's the result.
But also because I have a relationship, I want to develop, I want to work with people. I'm more willing to forgive them because I have the relationship. And so it's all of this stuff is tied together. And this is the thing about it being relationship based. Everything in here is tied together in a relationship. Over here, this stuff gets segmented out. So when we get to comprehension, comprehension is necessary to go from the intangible to the tangible. I have to understand to comprehend this to be able to change my actions, to be able to understand the covenant, to build the relationship, to have the forgiveness. I need to have the comprehension. But down here, all I need to know is how to do the program. I just need the knowledge. I don't need to know why. I don't need to understand why. I just follow the rules. Quality. The quality of this relationship is important. Over here, it doesn't matter if the quality is important. It just matters if I do the thing that I'm supposed to do. There isn't a quality issue. It's either done or not done. And so the important thing becomes quantity. How often do I do the thing? How many people are doing the thing? That's the thing that we want to know. How many people are doing the thing that they need to do? And then whether or not this is conceptual, again, ties back into here, or focused on detail. If I'm focused on detail, then that's because I need to know every single step of the program so that I can do the program right. I need to know every single piece of this program so that I can correctly do the program. Here, I need to understand the concepts because I need to understand the concepts that are driving my actions. I need to understand the concept of covenant, of relationship, of grace, of comprehension, of quality. Like you were talking about, what's the conception of tolerance that we're dealing with? You want to know the concept of tolerance so that you can see how it fits into this set. And here, everything is going to be conceptually driven. What do I understand about these things? What's my concept of Christ? What's my concept of the church? And that, by the way, is what this entire board is. Our concept of the church. What is the church? Is it Christ-developed, relationship-based, building on covenant, going from intangible ideas to our actions, the ideas that God has, the direction that He has to our action? Or is it man-developed set of programs that we create a theology for that you have to follow, or we're not going to tolerate you anymore? And it doesn't matter what else you do as long as you follow the program. And every church has a mix of these things because we're human. And we don't get things right. But the thing that we want to do is we want to keep building to this and putting away this. Does that make sense? Okay. I think we're good. All right, we're going to take just a quick break because I need to change the board again. When we come back, we're going to focus then on this. All right. So, the last thing that we want to talk about then is relationship. Because we saw how relationship connects with the church, and even how relationship ties into fear. And so the question becomes then, when we're talking about relationship, what are we understanding about relationship? And in this case, when we talk about relationship, I mean, I can talk about my relationship between you and me. I can talk about my relationship between myself and God. I can talk about my relationship between myself and the music stand. myself on the floor, myself in the air. I mean, there's all kinds of relationships I can talk about. So we're going to be a little specific this time and narrow it down. In this case, we're going to be talking about the kind of relationship we have with our family, our friends, our community, our church, our culture, the people around us, basically. What kinds of relationships are we having with the people around us and with God? So God is personal. So what kind of relationship are we having with Him? And basically we've got two types of relationships that we can develop. And again, two things here. One is a covenant and development relationship. That is, we have a relationship that is a covenant. It is a bringing us together. We have a relationship that is learned based on tolerance. So a covenant relationship is developed. A tolerance-based relationship is learned. And so we have a relationship that's either based on covenant or based on tolerance. And we talked about tolerance the last time. We talked about tolerance, these are the things you do, these are the things you don't, I tolerate this, and I don't tolerate that. When we're talking about covenant or development, we're talking about building something together. What are we coming together to build, to develop? And so when we're talking about a covenant relationship, we're going to be talking about a relationship that's Christ-focused. That is a relationship where Christ is the top of the relationship here. So over here we can say that we have maybe a husband and a wife, and we have Christ, and both of them are focused on Christ. So it's Christ-focused, where over here it's world-driven. It's my environment that I'm in. My relationship with another person is a result of not my relationship with Christ and how I relate to Christ and that person, but it's a result of my culture. It's a result of my family. It's a result of my work. It's just where I happen to be and the things that society tells me that I need to do in order to get along with others. So I have friends at work, and I have friends at work that I spend time with and I talk to, and we talk about this and we talk about that. One of the things that we say in the U.S. a lot of times is that you don't want to talk about religion and politics when you're talking to people. You don't want to talk about religion and politics because people have a lot of opinions about these things, right? And so if we're just focusing on the world and what's going on around us, our environment, and we start getting into arguments, well, that causes trouble for the relationship. And so I'm not able to tolerate the person, so I'm not able to have a successful relationship because I disagree with them. But if it's Christ-focused, we've got a covenant, well, sure, I disagree with you, you disagree with me, because our focus is Christ. Now we've got something else that helps us to develop this. It's focused on how to think instead of what to think. Again, if I'm talking about the relationships that I just have in the world, that I'm not thinking about this as tolerance-based, I'm not thinking about it, I'm just doing. It's the thing that I do, what I do. Again, what kinds of things do you discuss? How do you talk with people? How do you stand? How do you communicate? How do you relate to one another? What is the proper distance to stand from a person? How far away from a person should you stand when you're talking?
That depends on the culture.
What's that?
That really depends on the culture.
Oh yeah. So, in Colombia, how far away do people stand from each other?
Depends how close they are.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're hanging around together, if you're hanging around together with your family.
With the family, well, very close. Really.
Very close. Yeah, you get in pretty close to people.
But okay, one example just to clarify my mention about culture. In Argentina, if people say something, and then you go Monday, and then you get closer in to hear to the person, so that gets much closer.
Okay. Yeah.
But that doesn't happen in my country because yes, what did you say? We don't need to get close there. Japanese people. Example.
When in Africa.
Filipinas always touching. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like comforting.
In Africa, if you're talking to people, you'll be right here. Hi, how you doing? In America, if I get any closer than about here, that's getting pretty close right there. You know, this is. And yeah, and really, it's about what? Probably about a third of a meter, half a meter from someone is.
Well,
We talk about personal space in the U.S.
If not, you cannot bring
personal
Yeah.
space.
Personal space, and personal
We're
space is
lining
right
up
about
at the, we're lining up at the
right
bank.
about. This is it, right here. This is.
Turn around. We're lining up at the bank. Or to check out. It's about like this.
Yep,
In
yep.
Hong Kong,
If
it's
it's
like this.
yeah. If it's really busy at the bank, you might be pretty close. But
Because when I go to the States and I see people standing this far apart, I say, "Are you in line?" Yes.
yeah.
Yes,
And
you're in
you know,
line.
if you're on a bus in the States, or you know something like that, and you're standing, generally on a mass transit system in the U.S., there's still a little bit of space between people
And in
because
Hong Kong, they'll get right in
yeah,
there.
you're just like right there, there you are, and you're just gonna.
You got in my space.
Yeah, so which is why in the U.S. they have a saying, "You are in my personal space." You know, you are in my personal space. You're too close. Back up.
Especially the China people. I always thought, would it be the term privacy? Is you guys, Americans, invent this term, privacy?
I don't know that we invented it, but we certainly refined it. So, but what to think? You know, how close do I stand to people? And if we're dealing with a tolerance type relationship, that really causes issues. Because, you know, one of the things is if we're not thinking about the relationship, then you end up sending all kinds of messages that you didn't intend to send. You know, so you end up communicating things you didn't intend to communicate. And this is one of the big things about Americans, is Americans look everybody in the eye. And I know for a fact, most cultures that I've encountered, that's not normally how people interact with each other. Don't look at other people in the eye. Americans do. A lot of other people have gotten used to Americans doing this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because
But-
if you don't look the eyes, that means you don't
You are not
respect.
listening.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
not
And
listening.
in the U.S. it means you're being deceptive. In Africa it means that you want to fight. Yeah, but this then can really trip people up. This in the expectation, we have expectations based on the patterns that we've developed. Again, the patterns, the habits that we have. We have expectations based on these things. And so these expectations are what, you know, if it doesn't meet our expectations, we no longer have tolerance. And this is what happens. These things start getting broken. We no longer have the tolerance possible because you're not following the rules anymore. And so we don't have a relationship anymore. Where over here we have development, not expectation, but development of the relationship. So I don't know what you're going to do until I get to know you and figure out what you're going to do. I don't know what you're like until I understand you so that I can find out what you're like. And it's sharing. I share with you the things that I understand, you share with me the things that you understand, and we understand each other better now. In a tolerance-based relationship, because if you don't meet the expectations, the relationship, there's no tolerance and the relationship is broken, we end up deceiving each other all the time. Because I want to have the relationship with you, which means I have to get you to tolerate me, which means I have to behave according to certain expectations that I don't meet, so now I'm going to act in a different way than I normally would. So I act differently than I normally would because I want you to accept me, to tolerate me in this case, so that we can have the relationship. And I might do this, you know, every time you meet people for the first time, you're always cautious about how you present yourself because it's a new person and you don't understand anything about them. But with this, we'll keep doing this for years, decades with the same person. And that's part of the difficulty that this creates. Over here we have respect. I'm sharing with people, I'm developing people. And so I gain respect for these people. On the other hand, if everyone is deceiving everyone else all the time, this can very easily lead to contempt. You think about our political system, again, going back to communities. We got our political system. How many people really have respect for some of the leaders that they know are deceiving them? I'm not asking for an answer, I'm just, really, think about it. Just think about it. If I have somebody that I have a relationship with, and they are deceiving me, is it respect or contempt that that's going to generate? And so if we have an entire relationship system based on this, then what happens? Everybody is deceiving, and there's a phrase that we have, familiarity breeds contempt.
Yeah.
Well, if you're in a situation where you get to see how people are deceiving you all the time, where they're not meeting your expectations, and this is the basis of your relationship, yeah, familiarity will breed contempt. Because we don't want people to be deceiving us and, just trying to live up to everybody's expectations. We want to be able to work with people, to develop with people. That's what we're built for. We were designed for that. This type of relationship is interactive because we're building this relationship, we're sharing, we have respect, and so we can be interactive. But if I'm in a relationship built on expectations, deception, and contempt, I am going to always preserve this part of myself. It's going to be focused on me as an independent person. Myself, my development. And so I pull in. Instead of being interactive, I become independent. And there is an independence that is good. My ability to make my own decisions, my ability to understand my world and operate in it myself, these are good things. And there are times when I have to be independent because I'm trying to change something and nobody else wants to change. But I had a friend of mine who described Americans as independent to the point of insanity. That is, you're so independent, it's nuts. No one should be that independent. And Wyoming, where I was living, is probably one of the best examples of this. The entire culture of the state of Wyoming. If you can't do it yourself, it doesn't get done. Because you don't ask for help, ever. So if you can't do it yourself, it does not get done. You are going to do this thing, and I don't need any help. And look, it's a 2-ton engine you're trying to load into the back of the truck. I can do this myself. Yeah, I don't know how. I'll bodily pick it up and try to lift it into the truck or what, but I can do this myself. And that is that kind of just insane independence. But if our relationship is based on tolerance, expectations, and deception and contempt, we're not going to want to be interdependent and interactive with people. We're going to always have that part of ourselves that we don't want to let anybody else work with because this. And the thing that this generates ultimately is fatalism. Familiarity breeds contempt, is fatalism. If I get to know somebody too well, I won't like them anymore. That's fatalism. People will always disappoint me. Fatalism. I'm always going to mess up something in my relationship. Fatalism. Whereas this constant growth and development fosters hope and faith that we can develop, that we can change, that we can build, that we can do things better than we did them before, that I can become better than I was before, that other people can become better. and that we can build a relationship with other people. Family or friends or our community, any other people. We can build these relationships because we're able to build a relationship based on a covenantal development, the idea that we're being brought together. And so we can build ourselves up. This, again, this is the easy way to do it. It's just what we learn. It's what we learn from our culture. Most of the time, this is what our culture is teaching us. Because cultures are a collection of habits that people have, basically. A collection of practices that they have. A collection of ways of doing things. And those ways of doing things are passed on and they are learned. And so, it's the way we grow up. It's the environment we're raised in. It's the community that we grow up in. It may be the church we grow up in. This is developed. It's always going to be a process of development. This is the hard one. Because development always involves change. And in the case of working with Christ, transformation. Not just, changing. I can change my shirt. But transforming, becoming something that I wasn't before. Becoming something new, something different. That is what Christ tells us that we can do. That is what Christ tells us that we can be in Him. And so when we're developing our relationships, what ends up happening is Christ gives us 100% of Himself. So when He is giving 100%. We, in response in a covenant, would want to give 100%. But there's a problem with this. We're broken. There's only 80% of us to give, or 70%, or 10% of us that we can even give. When we're giving 100%, we're really only giving 20%. Because that's all we have. Because we're broken. But that's all right, because we give now what we have. We give to Christ, who gave to us. And because Christ has given us 100%, we're able to give to others. So we give to Christ, we give to others. The others, let's say that over here we're giving, say, 60%. And we give this to Christ and we give this to others. And over here we've got, 70% to Christ and to others. And now we have a third friend of ours down here. And he's a Christian. And so he has a relationship with Christ, and Christ is giving him 100%. And we're giving to him. And he's giving, let's say he's a relatively new Christian, and he's got a lot of stuff he's working on, so about 30% back to us. But all of these things, this 30% that's being given back are gains. It's growth. It's something we didn't have before. It's more than we had before.
What is the bottom?
Oh, this is just some friend. We'll say F for friend.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Sorry, Christ is unlimited.
Yeah.
But 100% is human's concept.
Right.
But then Christ does not fit into human's concept, and then we don't know. Human concept 100% is the maximum.
Oh yeah.
But there's no maximum for Christ.
Right.
And then actually, 60%. Husband, wife, a certain percent. You count about the relationship, how much you can give. I think it's hard to measure.
Yeah, it
relationship.
is. It is.
It's really hard.
It
And
is.
then we have our standard, and God has His standard.
Yeah.
Our standard may not be the same as God's standard.
Oh no. And the thing is, what we want to give in a relationship, is 100%. We want to give all that we can to our relationships. That's what we want to do. But we don't always have that ability. And the thing is, we want to give 100% of what we can give. It's possible to give more than you're capable of giving, and then you destroy yourself trying to sustain a relationship by giving more than you can, which is, because of the way we're designed, more than we need to give. Relationships are designed in a way that we shouldn't be destroying ourselves trying to sustain a relationship. If I'm trying to sustain this relationship and I am destroying myself, I'm destroying this relationship. And this one has to stay as strong as possible. So it is very complex, and this is just an example. So if we're interacting with a non-Christian over here, this person doesn't have a relationship with Christ. Well, wait a minute, no. What this person has is that. You'll notice there's no arrow going back here yet. Christ still died for this person. He's still building a relationship. Now, I build a relationship with this person, and we start giving to this person. This person starts understanding us through our relationship and starts understanding Christ through this relationship. And so builds their part of the relationship to Christ. Because of what we bring in our relationship with them. Because all of this, think of this as water. If I have water and I pour it into here, then the water that I'm pouring out is still part of this. What Christ gives us, we pass on to other people. And we give back to Him. And that constant reinforcement, that constant development is what builds this relationship. My giving out, my developing, my sharing, my respecting, my interacting with other people. Now, of course, if I've got somebody in this that is just doing this, then I can't build this with them. I can try. I can maybe, if I can get this started, then we can start to build this. But if I'm just focused on tolerance, then when I build another relationship, all I'm doing is, meeting expectations. I'm not really building anything, I'm just finding expectations there. So instead of giving as much as I can, even if it's only really 60%, I'm still trying to give 100. I'm giving maybe, because I'm independent, 20. So instead of the 60%, I give 100, which is actually 60. But if I'm only giving 10% instead of 100, how much am I actually giving? 6. There's not much going on here. I'm giving less. Because I'm expecting deception and all of these problems that are going to come along, and so I don't want to give. So instead what I want to do is work on this Christ focus. So Christ is the source of, and the focus of all our relationships. Even our relationships with non-Christians, Christ is still the focus, because they still have a relationship with Christ. They just don't relate back. Christ is still working with them, it's just not going the other direction. So Christ is still the focus for all of our relationships. And so we build this up, understand how to think well, how to understand people, and then we can develop and share, build respect, develop an interactive, hopeful, and faithful relationship. And every relationship we have is a combination of these two, by the way. Because there's always the environment we grew up in, and the things that we learn. And we're constantly trying, like we talked about in the sermon today, putting aside the old things and developing the new things. Always doing this. So every relationship we've got is a combination of these. And the goal, again, is to go from this to that. To leave this behind and to focus on these. Does that make sense? All right? This is what Satan does. Satan tries to put us in situations where we are stuck in a self-destructive cycle. The way out is to understand how to think, focusing on Christ, building ourselves up, transforming. This is transformation. These are two different things. transforming from this to this. You know, a caterpillar transforms into a butterfly, metamorphosis. But that's a process. That cocoon, that's the process of turning from a caterpillar to a butterfly. That's where we're at. That's what we're doing. All right, there we go.